So in this video, we're going to talk about One Man, Two Guvnors by Richard Bean. Now this is an adaptation of Carlo Goldoni's play, The Servant of Two Masters. And it is, so Goldoni's play was basically it's in the tradition of Commedia dell'arte, but because it's a written play, it's technically not. Anyway, we're going to set that aside. So it is a farce, essentially. I actually got to see this performed in London. I want to say around 2015, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's a farce, the premise of which is we have these groups of small-time criminals, and our protagonist is named Francis Henschel. He is described just as an Essex boy in the character listing here. He's a kind of charming buffoon. He's the Harlequin character from Commedia dell'arte, if you know the Commedia dell'arte tradition. Basically, he's big into food. He's not big into work. He's big into money. He's big into sex. And he is a sort of charming servant character. We have another character. We have a pair of characters. We have Rachel, who's in disguise as her brother Roscoe. Roscoe was a criminal. Rachel is not particularly a criminal, but she's in disguise as Roscoe because her fiancé, Stanley, has stabbed her brother to death. So they're both on the run. They're going to go to Australia, which they regard as a fate worse than death because they don't like opera. So Stanley and Rachel come separately to Bristol, where they're going to meet up. They've gone to Bristol specifically because Charlie the Duck, who's another criminal, sort of criminal patriarch, owes Roscoe money. Roscoe and Charlie the Duck's daughter, Pauline, are supposed to get married, but then they got word that Roscoe was dead, so now Pauline is marrying Alan, who's the son of Charlie the Duck's lawyer. Anyway, a lot of those relationships are not super important for what I'm going to be saying. What's significant here is we have Rachel, who is dressed as her brother Roscoe, and we have Stanley. They're staying in the same hotel. They've both hired Francis, promising to pay him to be their sort of servant bodyguard type guy. So much of the play revolves around Francis trying to navigate being the servant of two masters, as Goldoni's title has it, or being one man with two governors, as he puts it in his more sort of Cockney type accent. So, at one point, Francis expresses his dilemma. As an aside to the audience, he says, "You got to concentrate, ain't you, with two jobs? I could do it, as long as I don't get confused. But I get confused easily. I don't get confused that easily. Yes, I do. I'm my own worst enemy. Stop being negative. I'm not being negative. I'm being realistic. I'll screw it up. I always do. Who screws it up? You're the role model for village idiots everywhere. Me? You're nothing without me. You're the cock-up. Don't call me a cock-up, you cock-up." He slaps himself. "You slapped me? Yeah, I did, and I'm glad I did." He punches himself back. "That hurt. Good, you started it." A fight breaks out where he ends up on the floor. So there's a tremendous amount of physical comedy in the play. There's a lot of topical humor because the play is set in 1963. So there's a lot of references to the Beatles. There's references specifically to Ringo Starr because Roscoe apparently kind of looks somewhat like Ringo Starr. But there's a lot of this slapstick type humor in which, like, there's a really extended dining scene where Francis has Roscoe and Charlie the Duck in one room, and Stanley in the other room, and he's meant to be bringing them both food simultaneously, but he's also spent almost the entirety of Act 1 complaining about how he hasn't gotten to eat for 16 hours. And so he is skimming food off of the plates and building himself up a substantial reservoir of food, which he sort of brings an audience member who's actually an actor up on stage to sort of help him keep this stash of food. But at the same time, he's sort of running back and forth and like, all right, and trying to like work out whose soup is which and who's getting which wine and all these things. And like, it's this crazy frenetic scene. I mean, when you read it, it's hard to get the energy, but when you see it on stage, it is a very fast-moving scene where it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then the other servers, Gareth and Alfie, are on and off, and they're bringing stuff in. Alfie keeps getting knocked out, etc., etc. So there's just all this craziness that's going on. And it really is a play in that sense that works much better when it's seen than when it's read. It's funny when it's read, but it's hilarious when it's seen because you get this sort of exasperated, again, frenetic energy as the characters are moving around the stage and as Francis is trying to keep everything sort of under control, but he's very clearly losing that control. We've also got some other topical references that I quite like. There's this one here. There's a character named Dolly, who's the love interest of Francis, and she's at one point having a debate. Basically the gist of the setup here that you need to know is that Alan, Pauline's new fiance, has made a slightly disparaging comment about women. Remember, this is 1963. And Dolly says, "You want to watch your tongue, young man, slagging us women off. It's 1963. There's a revolution coming. I predict in 20 years' time there will be a woman in 10 Downing Street. Yeah, and she won't be doing the washing up. Then you'll see exactly what women can do. You'll see a more just and fair society. The feminine voice of compassion for the poor will be the guiding principle of government, and there'll be an end to foreign wars." Now, if you know the timeline, at least the rough timeline of post-war British history, in 1979, Margaret Thatcher becomes Prime Minister, moving into 10 Downing Street, the home of the Prime Minister. And she is debatably one of the least compassionate, least concerned about the poor, and certainly one of the least peaceful prime ministers since the time of Winston Churchill. Margaret Thatcher cut a number of programs to help the poor, the working class. Basically, she destroyed or set the foundations for the destruction of a lot of the welfare state that had been built up after World War II. And she started the Falklands War. So, of course, for British audiences for whom Margaret Thatcher would be a really, really important cultural figure, they would definitely get that reference. So again, we've got these things that I think they're really, really funny topical references, in part because they depend on they bring in a kind of irony that's really, really important for the tone of the play. We've also got a self-consciousness about the theatricality of this play. Um, for instance, uh, in Act 2, Scene 2, where Francis sort of makes his reappearance after the dining room scene at the end of Act 1, says, a pub forecourt, mid-morning. Francis is sitting, enjoying the sun, reading a newspaper and smoking. He puts the newspaper in his pocket. So I've eaten. Now, after a lovely big meal, there's a couple of things I just can't resist doing. One is having a little smoke. Drags on cigarette, and he lifts a buttock and farts. And that's the other. Beautiful. Some of you out there who understand your commedia dell'arte, those with a liberal education, your hummus eaters, will know that this play is based on Carlo Goldoni's 200-year-old Italian comedy, A Servant of Two Masters. And you'll now be saying to yourselves, if the Harlequin, that's me, has now eaten, what will be his motivation in the second act? Has anyone here said that? Perhaps in an attempt to impress a date? No. Good. Nice to know we don't have any dicks in tonight. My character, Francis, has to find a new base motivation to drive his actions in the second half. Your job is to try and work out what that might be. So, again, we've got this great self-consciousness about the play and what it's doing, its context as an adaptation of Goldoni, and within this theatrical tradition. So all of these things, I think, work really, really well together. And then the audience engagement is the other thing that I think is really cool here. And actually, that was one of the things I most remember about the performance of this that I saw better part of a decade ago, I guess. There's this bit here where Francis is just really hungry. As his main character trait in the first act. And he says, has anyone got a sandwich? There's 1,000 people here and no one's got a York ham and mustard, bacon, lettuce, tomato, cheese? Anyone? What? Has he got one? And then it says, opportunity to improvise with audience members throwing sandwiches. I remember this bit of the play from when I saw it because someone offers him a sandwich, and the actor who was playing Francis just completely lost it for, I don't know, probably, he just spent about 5 minutes or so laughing. So it was this brilliant moment where, like, it didn't really feel like a scripted moment. Clearly it is, because it's in the script that he's supposed to ask for sandwiches and someone is supposed to give him one, or multiple people are supposed to give him one. But the fact that that was the moment where he just, like, he broke down and started laughing and could not stop made it feel like this beautifully unscripted comic moment. And so, you know, it's an interesting thing. It's a cool thing about theater as an art form. Like, even though something may be scripted, it can feel entirely spontaneous, entirely unique in that moment. And it was a really cool part of the play. Yeah. So there it is.